there, folks, and welcome to our Connected Conservation September webinar. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Cass Bismeyer, and I'm a part of the Connected Conservation Community of Practice within the National Park Service. Our webinar series happens once a month, and the concept here is that we expose best practices or tools that enable parks and programs to work beyond boundaries with partners and neighbors outside of NPS units and programs. We're really excited about our webinar today. A thread runs through them. We have two speakers, Deanna Mitchell as well as Diana Miller. I'm going to do a quick introduction to them and then turn it over to them. So Diane Miller has served as the National Program Manager for the National Park Service, National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom since 1999. Diane began her career at the NPS in 1984, working in the National Register of Historic Places programs. She received her MA in History from the University of Maryland and BAs in History and Anthropology from Ohio University. In December 2019, she'll receive her PhD from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Her dissertation is on Wyandotte and Shawnee abolitionism and Underground Railroad connections in Ohio and Kansas. And our second speaker we have is Deanna Mitchell. And let's see here. Deanna Mitchell currently serves as the superintendent of the Harriet Tubman National Historical Park in Church Creek, Maryland. With a total of 32 years federal government service, she began her tenure with the National Park Service in 2005 as site manager for what is now the Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Site. From 2016 to 2018, she served in the National Park Service Savinetto Fellowship Program as a legislative affairs specialist in the Office of Legislative and Congressional Affairs in DC. Her first year in the fellowship program was spent on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer on the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. In 2015, Mitchell spent 7 months on a detail in DOI's interagency team implementing the Every Kid in a Park initiative. She holds a certification as a logistics management specialist, in which she has worked on the production of the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor for the U.S. Air Force. Prior to that, she also worked for the Department of Transportation and the U.S. Navy. We are so grateful to have you both on today as our September webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Diane, to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Deanna Mitchell, and I'll be starting with our presentation, and Diane Miller will enter in on the second half of the presentation. I'm so happy to be with you this afternoon, and what I'd like to present to you today is a presentation that basically speaks to the National Historic Site that's here in Church Creek, Maryland, honoring Harriet Tubman. And again, the theme, a thread runs through them, Harriet Tubman and natural cultural resources, those connections to the Eastern Shore. So I think it's important for us to begin with talking a little bit about Harriet Tubman and her connection to this particular part of Maryland. For those who may not know, Harriet Tubman, she was born in 1822 and she died in 1913. She was born into slavery here in Dorchester County, and her name was Araminta Ross, but she changed her name before she escaped for freedom to honor her mother, whose name was Harriet. So after she emancipated herself in 1849, she returned to this region at least 13 times to help free other enslaved people. She was also known as the Moses of the Underground Railroad. She was the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. And while here, she relied on a confidant by the name of Jacob Jackson, who was a free black man who assisted with the efforts that she was pursuing on the Underground Railroad. What an amazing woman with a number of accomplishments. She was a nurse, a cook, and a spy for the Union Army in the Civil War. And there was this ability that she had, innate ability for managing and navigating the natural landscapes and the waterways in this particular region of Maryland. She developed skills such as timber harvesting, and muskrat trapping and flax cultivation, all that she learned from her father and other men that worked the field. So we're very, very happy and honored to be here carrying out her legacy at this historical park. We also have a companion unit which focuses on Harriet Tubman's adult and twilight years in Auburn, New York. And I'll speak a little bit about that as I move throughout the presentation. So the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park. It was established by presidential proclamation on March 25th under the Antiquities Act during President Obama's administration. And that proclamation established the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Monument. Then that following year, through Congress, Public Law 113-291, under the National Defense Authorization Act, established the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad National Historical Park here in Maryland. And within that NDAA legislation, as I mentioned earlier, the companion park, the Harriet Tubman National Historical Park in Auburn, New York, was established as well. Now, both the National Monument and the Historical Park are managed as a single unit here at in Church Creek, Maryland. The park itself opened to the public on March 10th, 2017. And I thought I'd just share a few real quick statistics with you with regards to that first year of the site being opened. So visitation from March through December of 2017, that's really not a full year, but was at 120,000 visitors. And through our cooperating association, Eastern National, our sales during that time were $243,875, which was an amazing feat, I would say, during that time frame. So, you know, there are a lot of reasons why this particular resource and this historical park are significant. But I just wanted to highlight one of them with you today, and it basically is that the landscapes that are in this particular region, they serve as a regional example of the larger and diverse international network to freedom that Diane will be talking to you about a little bit later. That's just something that's a huge proponent here at the park. So with the legislation that came from Congress establishing the historical park is the legislative map. And I just wanted to take a few minutes to explain this map to you with regards to the boundaries. I'm not necessarily going to go by the order at the lower left portion of the slide with regards to the key, but the right side of the map, if you'll notice, there's a yellow line that shows a boundary down towards the bottom of the map, and then it comes back around, and it's really kind of hidden behind the green boundary there. That all is Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge. That's property that is owned by the refuge. The green boundary line that you see, that is the boundary, The green boundary that you see, that designates the national monument that was established under President Barack Obama. So as you can tell, we are a boundary within a boundary of the Blackwater Refuge. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the slides, just to kind of delineate that for you. Up towards the middle of the map, you'll see Harriet Tubman UGRR State Park. That's where Diane and I are located. That is where the visitor center is located, and that is managed and owned by the state of Maryland. Now, if you start to the left of that map, up at the top, and work your way all the way around to the right, you'll see a number of specific historic sites that have been designated. To the far left, you'll see Stewart's Canal, and right beyond that, you'll see Jacob Jackson Home Site. That is the parcel of land that the National Park Service owns. That parcel was donated to the National Park Service by the Conservation Fund, and that ties into the legislation that was passed by Congress. So we have an opportunity to interpret that particular area as we continue to build out this legacy here. And then as you venture around, if you go past the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park designation, you'll come to a number of other sites on the map. And again, these are key Tubman historic sites. Some of the areas, I don't know, there are several areas that have red slash marks through them. Those are authorized acquisition areas that in the future, the National Park Service wanted to acquire or had an opportunity to acquire those lands, we could. So just wanted to kind of give you a brief layout of how we are positioned here. So within this area, during Harriet Tubman's time, her connection was to these three specific counties: Dorchester County, which is where we're located right now, Caroline County, and Colbert County. And there are a cluster of counties that are together. So I also indicated in the boxes below the areas for each of the counties some of the significant points along the way that tie into Harriet Tubman and her legacy. And at the bottom, I think it's very important for us to make sure that as we're telling the story, that visitors understand that there are still in existence rural working landscapes and special places that maintain the same agricultural character that were important to Harriet during her time here as a child and a young woman. That's very critical. The landscape here is pretty much still a living landscape. So to make this all work, we do have legislative partners that were identified in the legislation. So based on that, one of the things that had to happen immediately was we had to enter into partnership agreements. So our legislative partners, National Park Service, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, with the National Park Service, as I mentioned, we own the Jacob Jackson Home Site. I also indicate on this slide the Network to Freedom National Program Manager, because Diane is physically located here at the park, and it's a wonderful opportunity for us to collaborate and to carry out the message of Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. So within the visitor center that's located here, the Maryland State Park, they have staff that operate the visitor center, but also the National Park Service will also have staff as well working out of the visitor center. Right now, I'm working to bring on staff. I'm an army of one, but through our cooperative management agreement with the state of Maryland, we have co-responsibility for operating the visitor center. Then again, Maryland Department of Natural Resources, this area where the visitor center resides is on 17 acres, and Again, this is managed, the visitor center is owned, the administration building is owned by Maryland State Park. And then we have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge is comprised of about 28,000 acres. And within that acreage, the Fish and Wildlife Service is responsible for managing the forests, the wetlands, and the aquatic habitat in the area. Through an interagency agreement with the National Park Service, they also provide law enforcement and resource management for the National Park Service. So if we have special events and programs and things of that nature, they're there to support in that manner. So we have a cooperative management agreement with Maryland Department of Natural Resources and an interagency agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We also have other partners that fall outside the realm of legislative partners. And this slide, I basically just wanted to kind of give you a quick snapshot because one of the things that I've noticed since I've been here is everyone is committed to a strategy of really protecting, preserving, and interpreting the legacy of Harriet Tubman through cultural resources and natural and agricultural landscapes. And we do have a group of very vast and broad-reaching partners, and some of these partnerships are informal, some of them are formal, but state and local governments, academic institutions, I mean, you can read the list right there, residents, that's on there. That residents were a key part in the early planning of this historical park. And then we do have partners that we have specific outreach to based on events and programs that we support. The Harriet Tubman organization, that's an organization that's been around for a very long time in helping to get things, helping to get us where we are right now with regards to this National Historical Park. Maryland Office of Tourism, Dorchester County Tourism, State of Maryland Department of Transportation, all of these are key partners as we work through this effort here. One of the things I think that also ties directly back into our collaboration with our partners, as well as the planning and operations of the site, are resource documents. And I've listed a few that are critical right now. The two that are in blue, they've already been accomplished. The Natural Resource Condition Assessment, that was completed this year. We're very proud of the work that went into that. It is now a part of the Integrated Resource Management Application Portal for NPS, and we're excited to have that completed. The Superintendent's Compendium, it's in place. And then the other three are currently being completed. We're very close to having the Historic Resource Study done. That should be done by the end of this month. And the Cultural Landscape Report, we should have that done by the 1st of next year. And our foundation document is currently underway, and it looks like that's something that will also be completed by the end of this year. So we're very proud of the work that we've been able to do. And what's been key in all of these efforts right here is we do look to and look forward to input from our legislative partners. So, any challenges? These are pretty specific, if you will. I'm not even sure if I really want to call them challenges, but they're just natural things that need to be addressed or taken care of in the type of unique situation that we're in with regards to a partnership park and a new park unit. So the first block that you see there, community and landowners, before I arrived in 2018, there were apprehensions from local people, residents in the community, people who have had farms within their family for generations, that were very concerned about how this historical park would impact private land. And through much dialogue and even just providing the example of the build out and how this would all come together to be a win-win for everyone, those apprehensions have subsided, and I think that ongoing communication is the key to that. So again, I didn't experience much of that because a lot of that was starting to kind of go away as I came on board, but that was a challenge. But open dialogue, I think, was the key. Clear messaging as a partnership part. I think that as we continue to work with our partners, it's important for us to make sure that staff are aware and understand that we're in this together and that we rely on each other. We hearken back to our partnership agreements and the legislation. So steps have been taken to clarify and fine-tune that messaging. And then, of course, National Park Service branding. That's so important for our opportunities to get the word out and to spread the presence of us being here through signage, interpretive material, and wayfinding. That's something that, without a staff, we turn to the Northeast Regional Office, and they've been wonderful support to us on that. So we do have challenges, but we're working through them. And then these next couple of slides, I'm not really going to go into too much on these, but I just wanted to just pass on the significance of how Harriet Tubman's influence has impacted future generations in not only just with her story, her personal story, but the cultural and the landscape and the cultural and the natural resources that are a part of this region. So, minorities in agricultural, natural resources and related sciences. That's a nonprofit organization that's doing a phenomenal job in helping to get the word out and to spread opportunities for people to enjoy or to get out and work in the land. Outdoor Afro, that's another organization. We've had some communication with them. They come here, they visit us. They have opportunities for the members to camp in this particular area. It's a wonderful organization. Girl Trek, the same. They're embarking upon the 125-mile byway that recognizes Harriet Tubman's throughway to freedom. And then, of course, Every Kid Outdoors, a wonderful opportunity for kids to get outdoors. And then these are just a few snapshots of the museum itself. The inside is a beautiful museum. And then, the landscapes. The top left, that's Stewart's Canal. That's a canal that was built by enslaved and free blacks back in the 1800s. I think it took a number of years, maybe I think it was like 20 years for them to get that built. It was an amazing task that they did by hand. But anyway, this is a beautiful site, and if you're ever in this area, you just have to really come and really enjoy this, and just know that we are working very hard here to carry out the mission of the National Park Service in a combined partnership effort. So I'd like to leave you with a quote by Harriet Tubman that is when she attended the Women's Suffrage Convention in New York in 1859. And I quote, "God's time is always near. He set the North Star in the heavens. He gave me the strength in my limbs. He meant I should be free." So, and if you need additional information, this is my contact information here at the park. And I appreciate your time, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Diane Miller.
questions after we're both done, so we'd be glad to engage with those. So I'm going to talk about community engagement and public history and the Network to Freedom. The Network to Freedom was created by legislation that was signed by President Bill Clinton on July 21st, 1988, and it created the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom program. We have three main charges. The first is to educate the public, provide technical assistance, and to create a network of historic sites, interpretive programs, and research facilities that have a verifiable connection to the Underground Railroad. We were also tasked to develop a unique logo that would identify members of this network. So I have the logo pictured there. Railroad. So when we were in school, we all learned, about Harriet Tubman and her courage, and we learned about Quakers that hid people in their cellars and such. But really, that misses a little bit of the point of the Underground Railroad. We're looking at the Underground Railroad as that resistance to enslavement through escape and flight. So it's people held in bondage who self-liberate, and their journeys and the people who helped them. Sometimes they made it on their own, and sometimes they had assistance. So in the Network to Freedom, we are really looking to illuminate that journey. What was it? What was the journey to escape your bonds of slavery, and where did you go, how did you go, and how did you create a new life in freedom? And as well as to look at the people that participated in assisting those journeys. So the kinds of sites that we're looking at include those associated with prominent people like Frederick Douglass or Harriet Tubman, Josiah Henson or Thomas Garrett. We look at stations, so this is what people mostly think about with the Underground Railroad, places where people were hid or sheltered along their journey. We look at also places that were associated with legal challenges to the fugitive slave laws. This particular example is in Washington, D.C., and this is where trials were held related to an escape where 70 or 80 people tried to escape on a ship called the Pearl and go down the Potomac River and got caught. We also look at military sites, where people who were enslaved, who escaped and then joined the military fought. This is a particular site in Arkansas where the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteers fought, and it was a pretty rough battle. We also look at commemorative sites and monuments. So this is one in Des Moines that commemorates an action there. And then we look at destinations. Where did people go? Where did they set up lives in freedom? And these examples are international because it is an international story, but there were destinations that were in northern states. And so it's a little more complex, I think, than what we learned in school. And notice that some of these sites, the Bahamas, Mexico, people went south as well as going north. We look at churches. Much of the Underground Railroad activity was centered around faith-based groups. So churches are important, whether or not anybody ever hid in that building. We look at cemeteries and burial sites because sometimes the only place that is left that has a tangible association with a person involved with the Underground Railroad might be their burial site. But we also look at rebellion sites, transportation routes like rivers and rail lines, escape sites, sites where people were rescued, where they were kidnapped, and maroon communities, which was groups of freedom seekers who might have gone out into the slums or someplace remote and established settlements. So that's a broad range of property types, and through that we kind of have come to see a fuller understanding of what the Underground Railroad was about. We also, by our legislation, are to include interpretive and educational programs, and so we have a variety of programs Many of them are tours. Some of them are school programs. The bikers and kayaks here, these are tours that people can get on the Eastern Shore and the Harriet Tubman landscape. This book is from a photographer who has a program of going around to Underground Railroad sites and taking photographs and putting them together in sort of artistic ways. And then facilities, which include archives, mostly archives or small community historical societies, libraries, places where you can go and actually find real documentation of the Underground Railroad. And so we've been working on this for almost 20 years, and the benefits for people to be recognized in the network is that it's a recognition of the authenticity of that site or program or facility. Kind of like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. It lets people know this really is not a mythical place, it's real. They get to use the Network to Freedom logo, which visually ties them into this national network. We've developed a Network to Freedom passport stamp that they can get, modeled after the Eastern National passports in national parks. It'll include them on the website and in this national database of listings. It allows them, facilitates them networking and collaborating with each other, technical assistance from the Park Service, eligibility for grants when we have funding, and helps them sort of organize and think about their research and documentation, which has a lot of uses for further interpretation and developing exhibits and tours. So after all this time, we have 640 members in the network, scattered over 40 states, plus DC and the Virgin Islands. I'm sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of more places that are potentially eligible. Most of our listings out of the 640 are sites, so 450 of them are historic sites. 118 are interpretive or educational programs, and 72 are facilities. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the power of collaboration. All of this work has been done mostly by people in communities, many of them volunteers who work on this research as a passion. And through the criteria and the process that we've developed in the Network to Freedom, that has kind of led a legitimacy to the Underground Railroad beyond it being its mythical status. And because of this process, I think that has helped to move us toward consistency of interpreting what the Underground Railroad was about, though there's certainly a ways to go on that. And it's stimulated groups to work together. And I like to show this picture here. This is the cover of a 2-CD set that was created by the musicians from New Orleans Jazz National Historical Park, but they got together with the photographer that did the book that I showed you a few slides ago, and a person associated with another Network to Freedom site in Tennessee, and created this CD. So that was pretty cool that they're already networking amongst themselves and sharing resources and cooperating as they develop interpretive materials. So as well, out of all of this work and these hundreds of sites, we've really come to have a new, richer understanding of the Underground Railroad. It's certainly a story of African American agency is at the heart of the story. The Black communities and churches were instrumental in this work. So we're focusing on the freedom seekers as well, and trying to dig out as much information as we can on what traditionally historians have kind of thought of as nameless and faceless. The time frame for the Underground Railroad, we realized that escape, if you think of it in terms of escape, people didn't wait until trains came along in the 1830s to start escaping. The time frame goes back to the earliest colonial period, and really even from people getting caught in Africa and put on the ship. That story of resistance is really what we're focused on. It evolved over time and place. In some places it was very coordinated, and other places it wasn't, but it was always about that resistance. So this collaboration not only has kind of stepped up the interpretation of the Underground Railroad, but it has also, I'm sorry, my slides are getting going ahead. It's helped on preserving some of these sites. So this first one is in Kansas. You can see the pictures on the top. I don't know why it's doing this, but this is what it used to look like. This poor building was the Free State Capitol, where they created the only free state constitution in the state of Kansas, and it was in dreadful condition, but you can see on the bottom it's really starting to come back. This other one is in New York. It was a Quaker meeting house. You can see on the top left that it was practically fallen down and how it has come along. These projects, they've got some grant funding through the Network to Freedom, but a whole lot of other funding and things that were leveraged. So some of the things that I've learned as I reflected on this work, partner does not equal philanthropy. So I started going to meetings in the Park Service, and they would talk about partners, and I was all excited because I had worked with all these partners that were like volunteer groups of retired school teachers and people that just had a passion for the history, and most of them didn't have a whole lot of money or resources. But when I went to these Park Service meetings and they talked about partners, they were talking about people that gave thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I encourage people not to focus only on people with deep pockets, because we've accomplished an awful lot with humble partners that maybe we actually have to provide funding to them, but the return is much bigger than you could ever imagine. So one of our partners, Deanna mentioned, was the Office of Tourism in Maryland, and they have really embraced the Underground Railroad and the Network to Freedom, and they, Governor of Maryland declared September as International Underground Railroad Month, and so, you know, that's a partner that hasn't given us money, but they have given us so much in terms of marketing and spreading the word and developing products about the Underground Railroad. In fact, probably even had a pretty big role in creating the Harriet Tubman Park. Another partner we've helped support a little teeny bit over the years, but is a youth group that takes disadvantaged kids on long distance bicycle trips, and their first ones were around the Underground Railroad. So they're wearing t-shirts in the one photo with our logo on it. They are, you know, spreading the word and getting inspired about the Underground Railroad, and bringing the kids in is more important than probably anything else we could do. Another thing that I've learned is that it's really important to consult with stakeholders early in the process. And we all, you know, we have public meetings sometimes, but it's usually to tell people what we've already figured out we're going to do. We try to slightly different with the network. We invited people in to hear from them what they thought, how they thought things should work. And, you know, when you do that, you have to really be prepared to seriously listen to what they're saying and try to implement things when you can. So one of the first things we did was have a charrette, and these are chronologically out of order, but the first charrette was in Columbus, Ohio, talking to people about what should this Network for Freedom be after the legislation passed, what should the logo be, that sort of thing. And then we had another charrette in South Carolina where we talked about how we document these sites, how do we use oral tradition, and that continues to inform us. And more recently, in our strategic plan, we made sure to have listening sessions and consult with our partners about how things should be. And another thing, important thing, is to facilitate connections and try to get your partners working with each other, even if you're not in the middle of the mix. So the Park Service doesn't always have to be the ones that is doing this networking. Once people come together and meet each other, they can go and work on projects together that we don't even necessarily have to be engaged with. So this is a project in Nebraska where the steward of a site down there worked with a teacher of high school history kids to research additional sites and get markers up. So that was a great collaboration. Another thing is this passport stamp that we use, and so this is people in the area here on the Eastern Shore for Harriet Tubman Day, scheduled special tours and events and things, and we developed this brochure with them, and then encourage visitors to go around and visit all of these sites. So just trying to bring the partners together to work together on things. And the last lesson that I really learned is, in some ways, my first important lesson is it's really important, I call it breaking bread, but partnerships really depend on relationships that are built over time and based on trust. And so I always think that if you can step out of the bureaucratic role or step out of the meeting and relate to people as human beings, it can really go a long way to help cement partnerships. So that was a quick run through, and we're glad to answer any questions anyone might have.
Great. Thank you so much to both Diane and Deanna for the excellent and inspiring presentation. Certainly a lot to learn there, and we definitely appreciate the value that you added there at the end, Diane, on partnerships and building relationships. We see that a lot in a lot of our initiatives around connected conservation, that, you know, really to do the kind of work that we're talking about has to start with that relationship building and trust. Okay, at this point, we'd love to open up for any questions. If you do have a question, go ahead and add it to the chat box or the question box, and we'll read it aloud if anyone wants to get us started.
Oh, hi, Deanna and Diane. This is Brian. I have a quick question for you, and that is, to what extent do states and the SHPOs engage and help fund Underground Railroad efforts and Harriet Tubman-related efforts? I mean, it sounds like Maryland is doing a lot, but how about the other states?
It's kind of mixed. Some states have really embraced it, and some states not as much. Indiana has really, the SHPO there has had an Underground Railroad initiative for a long time, and they work with a statewide nonprofit that's established around the Underground Railroad. They're the most active SHPOs that I can think of, but by this point, most SHPOs are at least open to the idea of the Underground Railroad and Underground Railroad resources. Iowa, again, also was another one that was very involved with Underground Railroad initiatives.
Great. We do have a few more questions that have come in. Question for Diane. Has there been any ideas from partners or internally to change or add to the program over the years?
I would say not a lot. We periodically, I mean, there's kind of a push and pull struggle over whether our requirements are too strict or the process is too hard. And so sometimes there's a push to kind of loosen that a little bit, and then sometimes, but a lot of members, once they get in, they don't want it loosened for anybody else. They realize, I think, the value and what it means to have gotten through the process and to really be able to say with authority that they have a valid site. it might just be escaping me, but I really haven't heard a lot about people wanting us to add anything.
Okay. A couple more questions here. This one's specific to the Harriet Tubman Visitor Center, National Historic Park Visitor Center. This question is about the total square footage and cost of the visitor center, and then a secondary question on the annual operating cost.
Okay. I just wanted to hear the first part again. I'm sorry, Cass.
No worries. It's the total square footage and cost of the visitor center initially, and then the second piece is the annual operating cost.
Okay. So, as far as the square footage, I'm not aware of what that is. The Maryland State Department of Natural Resources, they were the ones that constructed the visitor center. Again, it sits on 17 acres, so I'm not really aware of that and the cost. Basically, with regards to the National Park Service, we are just providing staffing to support the visitor center, and so therefore the annual cost for operating the visitor center, that would be something that the Maryland State Park Service would know. National Park Service, we just wouldn't have that information at our fingertips, but I could provide that information at at a little later date.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question in the question box, and if you do still have questions, feel free to plug them in there. Is anyone doing an event with the Harriet Tubman movie, and are there Harriet Tubman booklets available?
Harriet Tubman booklets, like unigrids, or?
I'm not sure. We can see if that person can clarify in the question box there. Perhaps you can tackle that first part of the question, an event with the Harriet Tubman movie.
I'm sure that there are. I don't believe that there's any planned here. The park actually, the visitor center just had an event to premiere the orientation film that was created for the visitor center. And in Maryland, because of International Underground Railroad Month, there have been a lot of events around the Underground Railroad, but I'm not aware of any specifically keyed to the movie.
Okay. And I'll follow up with the person who asked about the booklets as well separately and get back in touch with you guys too.
Okay. There is a but booklet, there's not a handbook.
Looks like she followed up and said specifically the Junior Ranger booklets. She picked one up at the National Center last November and is curious about if there are more or if there's
Junior Ranger booklets that the State Park Service did, and you pretty much, I think, have to be here on site to use them because a lot of the information is found in the exhibits. I don't believe there's a National Park Service Junior Ranger booklet.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's what we have for questions for today. Thank you both, Diane and Deanna, for the excellent presentation. Our presentation, just as a reminder, is recorded and will be available on our National Park Service Connected Conservation YouTube channel, as well as the Network for Landscape Conservation YouTube channel, directly following the presentation. And if you'd like to connect with us on our next webinar, we have scheduled for October 3rd, Biosphere Reserves and Intern Observations for Success. You can find that information on our Connected Conservation Toolkit. I'll plug that link into the chat box as well as send it up as a follow-up to those of you who attended. Thanks so much again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.